Many years ago, a merchant ship was on its way to deliver cargo to the ports of the Old World when a great tempest swept it far off course. After the storm passed, the captain spotted something shining on the horizon, an undiscovered country. He named it Nyaja after his daughter, though the imposing mountains bordering the coast earned it another name, the Shadowed Land. Soon the great nations of the Old World launched fleets of ships to claim territory. This period of frantic colonization would last a few score years. Suddenly, the ships stopped arriving, and those that set sail for the Old World never returned. Then came the dark. A shroud of black cloaked the heavens, blotting out the sun and raining down ash. Time was lost. Horrors untold crawled and clawed their way from the dark places of the earth. Social and spiritual upheaval followed as humanity began to despair. Finally, the clouds broke. The sky cleared, and we looked on with bated breath. The long dark is ended. Now is a time of change and opportunity for those with the strength, cunning, and passion to make their own way in Nyaja, the Shadowed Land. Chronicles of Viz Leany, Chapter 1. The Adventure Begins. Our tale begins on the 11th day of the first moon, in the 3rd year after dark, in the great port of Rakosis, capital of the Ashib territory. Satara bint Nasim Hariri, a young freelance captain, had recently returned to the city of Sales. A bit later than her client was expecting, she'd again followed a fruitless rumor concerning her father, a merchant sailor who had disappeared during the long dark. And while the trader was sympathetic to her circumstances, this was simply bad for business. Satara left with her payment, but her contract unrenewed. Upon returning to the Purple Lantern Inn where she was staying, Satara received an invitation from the renowned shipwright Sid al-Sufun Alim bin Takumi Arashima to discuss a business opportunity. Naturally intrigued, Satara accepted. She and her first mate Kanuki, a giant Minzokan man, arrived promptly at Alim's home at the 12th bell for dinner. Alim explained he was searching for a captain for his most recent work, a caravel called Viz Leany, and he thought Satara would make a fitting captain for her. She would be free to sail where she liked, encouraged to follow her exploratory inclinations, and bring back information and items of interest. Alim would be their patron, receive a portion of whatever they found, and Viz Leany would be well taken care of each time she returned to port. Thoroughly excited by this prospect, Satara accepted the position. Alim invited her to visit his shipyard the next day to see the vessel for herself. He had already handpicked a crew he was confident in to fill all the necessary shipboard functions, but he also recommended she seek out individuals with any specialized skills she thought might be useful on her adventures. Upon leaving Alim's residence to return to the Purple Lantern, Satara spotted a strange figure floating above the street.
Ratna Katara, Akash Darsham Raksasa bin Baal, was working at his shop in Rakosis and waiting on this month's shipment of gems from his mine to the north. Upon hearing a knock at the door signifying it had arrived, he got up to meet his men. As they were unpacking the cargo, one of the boxes fell over, as if of its own accord, and 5 stones lay on the floor: a sapphire, a ruby, an emerald, an obsidian, and a jade. When he asked his men, no one could seem to recall where they came from. Finally, he discovered in a note from his foreman that they were all recovered from the same cavern in his mine, though Akash knew simply from the array of stones how unlikely it was that they all formed there naturally. Opening his senses, he felt that they all radiated a slight magical presence, and when he took each one in hand, experienced something rather extraordinary. Parts of the jade stone felt smooth as silk, while other areas were as rough as shark skin, giving him the strange sensation of both comfort and harsh reality. While nothing seemed strange about the emerald's appearance, upon touching it, he was flooded with feelings of fear, hope, and relief. As he went to examine the triangular obsidian shard with red impurities, he drew his hand back in pain as the edge sliced his finger, seemingly absorbing his blood. However, when he finally picked up the stone and looked at it through the light, he could find no blood. He was filled with confusion and curiosity. He was unsure if it came from the obsidian or the event itself. Next, he inspected the ruby, beautiful beyond compare, warm to the touch, and light for a stone of its quality and size. As soon as his fingers touched it, he felt a sense of regalness and awe. As his fingers finally touched the sapphire, he was unprepared for what came next. Looking into the gem was like looking into the depths of the sea itself. Overcome with wonder and terror all at once, he felt it would rip him open until his shuddering hands dropped the stone. He was back in his shop. Though Akash felt both a pressing need to open the gem and an intense fear of what that would bring, he was unable to touch the stone again without his hand shaking, unable to grip it. After a few hours of studying it, he was left with a sense of restlessness, feeling as though he could do more with either the gem or himself. Wrapping the stones, he took them up to his home above his shop and placed them upon his mantle, spending the rest of the evening in prayer and study, trying to figure out what message the jinn were trying to send him. The following day was a special occasion. Durai Ranbir, the man as close to a father as Akash ever had arrived in port, and they were meeting for supper. Captain Ranbir brought some, shall we say, good spices from up north that one could enjoy on something other than food. He also updated Akash on recent news that the world's greatest shipwright, Sid Al-Safan Alim bin Takumi Arashima, had built a new ship and was in search of a captain for her. Upon hearing this, Akash knew he had to be a part of it. He had long wanted to go out and search the world for relics of the jinn. He thanked Captain Ranbir, paid for the meal, and then ran out. As soon as he was outside, he took to the air, using the blessings bestowed upon his blood by the jinn, and flew to Alim's place. After seeing the captain below walk out of Alim's residence, Akash flew down to introduce himself. The captain, and her first mate, were understandably concerned upon seeing a man fly down from the sky, only to hover before them for a few moments. Landing gracefully, Akash introduced himself as but a humble gem merchant and jinn blood of the air. Having heard she would be captaining Alim's newest ship, Akash offered his services and demonstrated his powers, while lifting up the three of them and turning them around in the air. Before their feet touched the ground, Akash knew what the captain's answer would be. The look of excitement on her face was all he needed to see.
Arata Kasumi was born into a wealthy Menzokan family, his father a politician and his mother a high-ranking guard, as well as an older sister to whom he was rather close. Bored with a life of relative luxury, Kasumi didn't follow his father's path, working the rather mundane job of accounting. However, he later joined the criminal organization, the Brotherhood of the Watching Eye, and took up the trade of a thief. The precepts of the Brotherhood were simple. Do not reveal your true self, your dual nature, to the unenlightened, and whatever you do, do it well. Though these commandments led to a diverse set of practices, there were some commonalities among the peoples of Nyasha. Few of the Brotherhood were exclusively crooks. Most maintained legitimate businesses or occupations, some quite prosperous. Being caught practicing on the far side of the law was the ultimate failure, while being a suspected yet unproven criminal was considered the highest success. As long as a thing was done well, it is done in the Brotherhood's name. Success and skill were the determining factors, not some abstract concept of right or wrong. In order to differentiate himself from his father, who lives risk-free as a politician, Kasumi had joined the Menzokan Brotherhood as a way to test himself and keep his skills honed. He'd recently been hired on by an Ashib member of the organization in Rakosis as a personal accountant and assistant. After receiving a message from his employer, he had to chase down a street urchin whom he realized had also absconded with his money, and definitely didn't almost escape this professional thief. His pride intact after the ordeal, Kasumi set out on a ship to Rakosis. After arriving in the city of Sails, Kasumi found a small inn where he could bide his time, waiting for the news of his employer and relax. Now, with a position on the ship's crew soundly tucked away, it was time for Akash to meet his Menzokan arrival. Finding him was rather easy, though Akash could have sworn he gave the man enough money to hole up at a better inn than the one he was walking into. Maybe the exchange rate on the gems he sent as payment had changed. He wasn't sure. After asking around, the wind-blown craftsman found Kasumi in one of the upper rooms. The man was very bland, too plain to be Akash's assistant. The two conversed about the trip here before Akash let Kasumi know about the plan to use this new venture to hunt for rare treasures and improve the Brotherhood and their influence wherever they would go. After discussing their plans, Kasumi moved his new partner and personal assistant out of this horrid place and got him some clothing fitting both Kasumi's style and Akash's flair. Kasumi quickly turned down the first 3 outfits. The following morning, they went to tour the ship that would be the stage for their new shenaniganery.
Meeting Aleem at his shipyard, Sitara was taken on a tour of the ship which she was to captain. A striking ship crafted of a deep red wood, it seemed more work of art than a sailing vessel. Similar in style to a caravel, the two-masted design promised speed and maneuverability. Her name, Viz Leany, seemed somehow familiar to Sitara, though she could not place it. The figurehead, that of a beautiful woman with her arms outstretched, hair flowing behind her, struck a chord in Sitara's heart. Investigating the captain's cabin beneath the quarterdeck, Sitara found the rear windows to be paneled entirely in stained glass. Realizing the panels could be moved to create different abstract scenes, Sitara spent some time becoming familiar with her new room. Joined by Akash and his personal accountant, Kasumi, the trio continued their tour of the ship. Though Kasumi found little of interest on the ship, Akash struck up a lively conversation with Aleem, one craftsman to another. As they were led to what would be their quarters, Akash realized there was more to this ship than meets the eye. Covered in scrolling woodwork that initially appeared decorative, Akash discerned that it was actually prayers in a number of different languages, including Menzokan, Awami, and Dashib. Realizing that this ship bore invocations to the gods, Akash experienced something of a revelation and dedicated himself to the journey he was about to undertake.
Khalifa Mezi was a sergeant of the city guard in Al-Kira. Like many others, she was raised in the military academy and began intense training in combat at a young age. Over the years, she watched how terribly the people of Al-Kira treated each other, leading her to question her beliefs in the military dictatorship. One day, she received orders from her commanding officer to bring in a rabble-rouser named Cozy Farouk, who was speaking out against the inequality created by the dictatorship. Mezi could not bring herself to go through with the arrest, as she secretly believed he was right. She warned Farouk of the warrant and helped him and his family escape by sending one of her guards away and knocking the other unconscious. Knowing the consequences of her actions would be dire, Mezi knew her only choice was to flee Al-Kira. Mezi spent the next 2 months traveling by foot and caravan until she finally made it to Rakosis, the city of sails.
Due to some personal tribulations, Dasha left her tribe, the Laranovna, to see the wider world. Making her way from the depths of the Onray forest, Dasha found herself in the Dashian village of Kalika on the forest's southern edge. Not long afterward, an Ashib ship came to the village to resupply while on its way back to Rakosis. Endearing herself to the grumpy captain, Durai Ranveer, Dasha agreed to work for her passage to the Ashib capital city. Once arriving in the city of sails, Ranveer gifted Dasha with several bolts of cloth for her to sell on the bazaar in order to establish herself as a successful merchant.
After viewing the ship, Captain Sitara, Akash, and Kasumi ventured into the Grand Bazaar of Rakosis, where, so long as you had the coin, you could find anything you wanted. They were strolling the streets, innocently window shopping, and buying bits and bobs, when they encountered a truly sinister creature of nightmares. It dove from the sky with a blood-curdling screech and absconded with Akash's gem-tipped sword cane. The trio, led by the nettled gin-blooded, followed the feathered thief deeper into the market until the peregrine falcon finally alighted upon the stall of a traveling trader. The purveyor, a giant Awami woman who was as beautiful as she was tall, introduced herself as Dasha. After taking a moment to recover from the shock of seeing someone as pretty as he, Akash confronted the woman. He had to admit, to himself at least, that her scam was rather novel. How ingenious it was to train her bird to hunt the belongings of unwary shoppers and lead them to her booth, only for the Awami merchant to return the item and offer a small discount on her wares, if they purchased now, of course. Upon discovering that Dasha had gained the trust of Captain Ranveer, Akash was about to buy her bolts of silk before Sitara stayed his purse hand. The captain, who was half Awami herself, was curious to see the woman's salesmanship. With not one, but two skilled traders on her crew, their business deals could prove quite lucrative indeed. Besides, the Grand Bazaar of the City of Sails was the perfect stage to demonstrate the mercantile prowess that was something of a point of pride amongst the Awami. Dasha did not disappoint. The three watched for about an hour as she hawked her wares, her skill surprising even the Ashib craftsmen. Apparently the captain was also sufficiently impressed, enough to offer Dasha a position on the ship, which she gladly accepted. To herself, Sitara quietly wondered at having come across another Awami who appeared to have taken to wandering outside the spires of the great redwood forest.
After becoming acquainted, Dasha invited Captain Sitara, Kanuki, Akash, and Kasumi to lunch at the Purple Lantern Inn. As they arrived, Mezi came down from her room to have lunch alone in the corner of the dining area. Moments later, 3 armed and armored Tatoan men entered the inn. They confronted Mezi, revealing themselves as bounty hunters, and the tension escalated quickly into a brawl. Although Mezi proved quite capable of protecting herself, a group of strangers jumped to her defense. With a flourish, the captain drew her scimitars and struck one of the men, nearly severing the muscles in his arm. Kasumi, with extreme subtlety, equipped himself with a pair of shuko hand claws. As Akash drew his cane sword, it felt as though a gust of wind followed, while Dasha also drew a short sword to aid the party. Kanuki, with his brute strength, swung around his tetsubo, causing substantial damage both to the bounty hunters and the inn. Realizing that they were outmatched, the bounty hunters fled the inn. Once the excitement died down, the party went their separate ways to make preparations for their journey. Akash set his business affairs in order, and Dasha acquired a dozen crates of figs as Viz Leany's first cargo. Captain Sitara sought out Mezi and had a lengthy discussion with her regarding her fugitive status, before inviting her to join the crew. Although Mezi agreed, she warned the captain that her presence could potentially put the crew in danger.
On the eve before Viz Leany's departure, Sitara, Akash, Kasumi, Mezi, and Dasha shared dinner at the Purple Lantern. Kasumi, having noted with some bewilderment that Sitara referred to her looming first mate as little brother in Minzokan, politely inquired after their not-so-apparent familial bond. Sitara explained that, a couple of years ago, she had been hired by a small Minzokan village to hunt down an ogre. She tracked down the monster, only to find a giant of a man living alone in the forest. Realizing the villagers had misjudged him based on his frightful appearance, she befriended him instead. Kanuki had been traveling with her ever since, and she had adopted him as her brother, which, she remarked, was perhaps something of a family trait. Kasumi commented that while Kanuki referred to Sitara's little sister, he had been a bit more confused by her use of little brother. Though Sitara was uncertain of Kanuki's exact age, she had used the term believing it had simply meant brother, and chuckled at her linguistic error. The crew continued conversing jovially over supper when suddenly a young boy arrived to inform Akash that someone was attempting to steal the ship. The question of why exactly their esteemed jewelry associate had someone watching the vessel was quickly forgotten as the crew rushed to defend their new ship. Upon arriving at Aleem's shipyard, they discovered the guards had been taken out and found themselves face to face with 5 armed ruffians. Just as they seemed to be gaining the upper hand, a tall cloaked figure appeared from the shadows, plunging a long knife into Dash's back. Recognizing his voice, Sitara called him out, and their crewmates ceased their fighting to look on in confusion as she identified him as her brother. Her other brother, Stig. Though the red-headed young man, dressed in an eclectic mix of Ashib, Skinden, and Oami styles, bore about as much familial resemblance to Sitara as Kanuki did, the almost childlike bickering that ensued left everyone with little doubt as to their connection. While Sitara had heard Stig had been associating with, shall we say, rougher crowds as of late, she believed he was attempting to commandeer Viz Leany despite her, while Stig contended that it was nothing personal. After all, it was a really nice boat. The best, really. Their arguing concluded with Stig begrudgingly agreeing to take his men and leave. The crew checked on the guards, who fortunately were all alive and would recover from their injuries, before returning to the inn to retire for the evening. Sitara, however, went off into the night, determined to track down her wayward brother. She rode along the coast south of town until she came upon Stig just as he and his men were about to pull out to sea in a longboat. Sitara extended him an invitation to join her crew, which, after his initial puzzlement, Stig declined with some disdain. Seemingly unruffled, but also unsurprised by his response, she asked if he had heard any news of their father, to which he replied he had not. Hiding her disappointment, and knowing she would not be able to sway him, she cheerfully bid her disgruntled brother safe travels.
The next morning, the command crew assembled at the shipyard, and Aleem introduced them to the ship's crew. The specialists were Malal Kamal bin Indir Yilmaz, the ship's pilot, a melodramatic Ashib man; Imris Hadwin, master of tops and the ship's bard, an extravagant Dacian man; Parsara Jyotish bin Amar Kakari, the ship's purser, soft-spoken Ashib man; Skala Dragonvalder Vendela Skipsbegare, the ship's carpenter, powerfully built Skinden woman; Zhu Jian, master of arms, a severe Minzokan woman; Chirurgos Minkeres Diallo, the ship's surgeon, a large Tahtoan man with soulful eyes and voice; and Tabak Basim bin Salah Al-Dir Talfiq, the ship's cook, a jovial Ashib man. The men before the mast were comprised of experienced Ashib sailors who were specially trained to control the elaborate rigging of Viz Leany. These sailors, all holding the title of Bahar Sidi, or Master Sailor, were Adam bin Junaid Abdul Rashid, Bassam bin Dana Ajam, Nimat bin Junaid Saab, Sajjad bin Butrus Sakaf, Shakil bin Nabil Najim, and Wasi bin Maram Karim. With introductions made and possessions stowed, the ship made ready to set sail. Kanuki and Sitara stood at the figurehead, leading a ritual of good fortune, as Viz Leany, wreathed in incense, broke water, and made for the horizon.